was revealed by true parents and true father. His birthplace, Cheongju, actually dumped him on his trip to North Korea, his first trip to North Korea, the first time he went. He visited this birthplace, and as you know, he took back some earth, some of the soil from the hometown, which was mixed with the holy salt that Father consecrated at Cheongju recently. So, if people, maybe not us, but people who really struggle to find the truth, they really, really struggle throughout their life. Like a battle. Even, scientists, if they come up with some theory, that they struggle with all their mind and body. So you can imagine, in order to unlock all of the secrets that I would unlock in his battles to uncover this truth, how extraordinary effort he had to go through. I cannot even imagine what he experienced. But he was prepared, obviously, and he was sent. And on that very early morning at Easter, in 1935, when he received Jesus' commands, at first he didn't want to accept it, as you know. But as Jesus continued to ask him, he finally agreed to do God's will. Because he knew how large a task it was. He knew how immense the burden he would have to carry. He felt it. And like anyone, especially a 15-year-old, although some extraordinary 15-year-old he was, he wanted to go away from it, but finally because of his love for Jesus and God, he accepted it. And I think already his love for humankind. And maybe his love for all creation, which he has. And then, for that period of over 9 years, he struggled mercilessly with all of his effort in order to bring the divine principle. We know, especially to unlock the reason of the fall, the cause of the fall, then we can imagine that Satan totally wanted to block that, conceal that. And we were told that father even had to 3 times persevere, even after the rejection by God. He had to come back and say, this is it. So that kind of spiritual test. These are some quotes of Abedin talking about how difficult it was to discover this. More difficult than picking up a specific grain of sand from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. You have to use such analogies to even come close to understanding what he is. Abedin endured. And then on our part, this is about what it took maybe for our ancestors, right? Or maybe even in your own course, in addition to your own course, to meet true parents. More difficult than fishing for a specific fish in the entire Pacific Ocean. So that kind of, that's why, in a sense, how grateful we can be, how grateful we ought to be we know that Adam didn't study, he didn't go to university and get a doctorate in theology, right, to do this. That it was direct confrontation with the spirit world. And we also know he studied with the scripture. He had three, we know this, right? He had three scriptures open. Korean version of the Bible, Japanese version of the Bible, and English translations of the Bible. And as he was, searching through the scripture, he was struggling to figure this out. And when we teach the principle, especially when we teach it as it illuminates the Bible, then we realize how extraordinary it is. And again, we realize as people who study the Bible all their life, and how little they come to understand it. How little of the principle is out there. But he was able to do that because of complete dedication, absolute love, absolute obedience, absolute faith. Under those conditions, then God could reveal to him, as he studied the scripture, its meaning. So these are some of the key dates in the emergence of the divine principle. Obviously, beginning with the mandate in 1935, and then he started right after that in August 15th, which is, I believe, Independence Day, right? To delve into the principle, and then for those 9 years, that's the culmination, I guess, when. It makes sense, doesn't it? That, because this was the source of real liberation. The words which could bring freedom to us, could liberate us, was completed that August 15th, 1945. And then for a period of 7 years, of course, this was the 7 years when all Christianity was meant to unite with true parenthood, 1945 to 52. He was disseminating, he was preaching the principle and giving it out, giving it to others. So what is called the original copy of the divine principle is from May 10th, 1952. And that was actually, we know the establishment of the church, but I want to just stay on the divine principle. I think it's Wally Hisu. Is it Wally Hisu? Is that the explanation? Hisu. Hisu, is that the explanation? That's the first one. And again, explanation. That's August 15th. It's the date, August 15th again, 1957. Wally Hisu. And then the Wali Kangran, which is the text that most of you have.
Divine
right?
principle.
Yes. Then that was first in 1966. I don't know, now we're in like the 50th edition or something. Because it's reprinted. It's something way up there. Many editions have been printed of it. And of course, just within the last few years, Mr. Yu explained that this original divine principle, Father began speaking lots of the content of that in Hawaii, in the King Garden, back in September 1st of 2008. And then he instructed President Yu to begin the first ODP workshop. That was in October 10th, 2008. That was the first time it was formally taught. Okay, so this is the background of the teaching, both the divine principle as well as the ODP, which we're receiving now. Then we all, I don't know how many of you studied, maybe you studied a little bit of unification thought in the Victory over Communism theory, some more, some less. But all of that teaching was on the foundation of the divine principle. So, if you read the divine principle, Dr. Carlson, who's here with us, has studied unification thought intensely. And we've been studying the divine principle together weekly on degree. And a few times he expressed how, oh wow, that's in the divine principle. Something he thought was maybe at first just in unification thought. So actually, I think President Lee followed the principle very closely in developing, and of course checked everything with other. But it's really based on the divine principle so directly. And you will see that however, there's a few additional things that are in this ODP that are coming out of the unification thought. And even I saw one place where it's coming from the BOC theory. We'll see that. Okay, this is of course the wonderful, truly magnificent prayer that Father wrote. And his introduction when this was first published, he says, after he met Jesus, I walked this way, following heaven's orders to fulfill God's will. Okay, would you like to read, someone like to read that poem for us? Could you read it?
I think that's what. See if it's Crown of Glory.
Yeah.
Crown of Glory. When I doubt people, I feel pain. When I judge people, it is unbearable. When I hate people, there is no value to my existence. Yet, if I believe, I am deceived. If I love, I am betrayed. Suffering and grieving tonight, my head in my hands. Am I wrong? Yes, I am wrong.
Continue.
Even though we are deceived, still believe. Though we are betrayed, still forgive. Love completely, even those who hate you. Wipe your tears away and welcome with a smile those who know nothing but deceit, and those who betray without regret. O Master, the pain of loving, look at my hands. Place your hand on my chest. My heart is bursting, such agony. But when I love those who acted against me, I brought victory. If you have done the same things, I will give you the crown of glory. Sun Myung, 1935.
That would be extraordinary at any age. But someone to write that at the age of 15 is, he is the Son of God. I have no other way to explain that. Really. No other way to explain it. I can ask you a question. But when I love those who act against me, I brought victory. If you have done the same, I will give you the crown of glory. Who is I in the last paragraph?
True Father, God.
No, it's true Father. True Father himself.
Who is
God.
Could you both be right?
Yes.
Yes.
Now they're one. They're one now.
Praise God.
100%.
He was not really united with God, so when you wrote it...
No, but he was, see, what I'm going to explain is that he is sent by God. He is from God, right? From the Godhead.
Right.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he's yet become perfect.
No, it doesn't. But he's, as much as he's grown, as much as he is, he's one with God. There's no separation. Because he's directly from God. He doesn't have the original sin. That's different from being complete. Right? There's three stages. There's growth without original sin. Perfection. Right? Or growing, falling, and then having to go a course of restoration. That's why with Jesus and true Father, because they came from God, see, their sacrifice is all the more valuable with God. Because they don't have any sin themselves. They don't deserve any of this. See, they don't deserve any of this suffering. Yet they suffer the most. Not for themselves. That's the point. Even their suffering is not for themselves. It's not like our suffering. So much of our suffering is because, we're fallen. Almost self-inflicted, if you will. But in the case of Christ, in the case of true Father, in the case of Jesus, they didn't deserve any of this. They only did it for us. That's why this poem is so amazing. And also, not only is it amazing, but that also explains why he could at 15 say this. Do you understand? Because he's sinless. Because he has that kind of direct reflection of God in his heart. That's what it's all about. That's what we're following. We're not just following some guy who happens to be a great spiritual master, a great spiritual leader, who had a really fantastic philosophy. That's not who we're following. We're following the Christ, who is directly one with God, who comes from God. Why? That's why Christians, they knew that about Christ. That's why they were willing to go to the cross. Bear anything. We didn't understand this about true Father, quite frankly. The only true Father himself had to reveal it. Frankly, many of us probably felt something like that in our hearts when we really thought about true Father, prayed about true Father. And I know many elders, when I was at Belvedere in even like the 80s, Colonel Hunt was praying, after he finished translating, at first I thought it was weird where it was coming from. He was praying to God and true Father directly. Remember that, David? Everyone was like, what is he doing? Well, if he's from God, and from the God, then he's sinless. And they're totally one. It makes total sense. He's in a status different from everyone else, even once we're restored. He's the only one on earth who came without original sin, as Adam was supposed to, and fulfilled the blessing. Even Jesus, who came without original sin, came from the Godhead, could not fulfill the ideal. That's why, quite frankly, a lot of things Alvin says, and he's been saying, we couldn't understand, and it would be very hard to explain it to any Christian, right? Like, Jesus follows me. He blesses Jesus. But it isn't. It's directly, it's not he's just saying this. It's right out of the principle. And remember, the principle is from God. Even Alvin, when he listens to the videotape, right, he often says, because he's fully man, understand. As the Young said, he's fully man, 100% man, but 100% God. Both. It's that logic. It's not either or, it's both and. Both and. Not either or. And, you know, that's why Abraham says sometimes, wow, did I say that? Right? In his communication. This is from God. It's not like he's speaking his own words or what he wants to speak. It's not it. So, and this is amazing. Oh, and then apparently I don't know who this was, but so this poem, according to this, was sent to America by a missionary. One of our missionaries sent in the late 50s. It could have been, I guess, could have been David Kim or Youngwin Kim or Dr. Park or Sunny Che. Was it Pak Bo-hee? Okay. So Pak Bo-hee was, it makes sense. Yeah, he would appreciate this and know what to do with it. He sent it to this international committee of poets. And they, according to these 9 categories, creativity, originality, writing style, theme, selection of phrases and vocabulary, coherence, consistency, logic, ability to understand and analyze, I guess it means the depth of the thought and the clarity of the thought, right? On those various criteria, they awarded this poet, this poem, a medal, a trophy in metal, which, you know, just says that you don't have to be a believer to recognize the truth, the extraordinary truth. And obviously, because if that were the case, none of us would have ever tried, right? So, I mean, the good news is that the truth is powerful enough to open our hearts and change our minds and hearts, right? That's the good news. So we just have to share it. And you know, this is, of course, one of the reasons we're here, right? We're all learning this so that we can share it with others. We're still a tiny number, right? We're a tiny number. And everyone has to hear this, right? So how are we going to do that? Well, we can begin by doing it by really understanding it more deeply ourselves, right? So that even if we don't feel totally comfortable lecturing in front of groups, we can at least share insights, because, you know, sometimes the most effective thing is to share just a brief insight, and people say, wow, you know, where'd you get that? And that's the opening to, you know, for them to learn more. And there's so many ways that we will be able to communicate the principle as we go on, through the radio, through television. It's happening in Nepal now, through the internet. You know, I think the internet will be a major vehicle. We already have online some amazing videos of the Divine Principle on Vimeo and also on YouTube. They're magnificent, done by an American brother. Magnificent. People who are not members are like looking at this stuff and they're saying, wow, what is this? You know, it's amazing. So the truth is amazing, and now God has given us the means to share it. All right, I'm going to now actually start the principle of creation. We have finished lecture 2, and I do want to say a few things about principle of creation. Yes, dear.
I have this very stupid question.
Oh, I'm sure it's not.
Ano sabi niya?
Considering the fact that we know Jesus is the only son of Mary, and if we have to ask about Father's origin, having no original sin, what about his brothers and sisters?
Yeah. Jesus.
I don't know, I'm asking about your father. You said father has no original sin.
Right.
How about his brothers and sisters?
Oh, yeah. The foundation of Jesus having no, of God having, true God having no original sin, true Father having no original sin, I'm going to explain there was no the condition for that had already been established because of the restoration of the blood lineage through Jesus. And because true Father came by God, sent by God, to fulfill Jesus' mission, on that foundation, Adam could be born without original sin.
So there is no cleansing of father's blood lineage as is we talk about in Jesus'
Yeah, the same thing didn't have to happen. That's not to say that he doesn't have an extraordinary blood lineage. I mean, extraordinary people, but
there is no point looking.
yes, that's right.
But Jesus, of course, also had brothers and sisters.
That's right.
Not
That's,
married.
That was after.
yes, and I thought that was the question, but that may be your question. So, do you understand the answer to the first question? Now, to the second question, which was, well, Jesus came without original sin. He had brothers and sisters, or at least half brothers and sisters.
But not the same father.
Yeah, that's right. But
exactly.
I will say that I think certainly they had that there's no indication in any scripture or in any Christian theology that his brothers are brothers and sisters, but they're considered full brothers and sisters actually in the Christian tradition.
So my question is this: then to be born sinless has nothing to do with the literal genetic blood lineage.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And basically Protestantism basically, or at least some strange Protestantism has affirmed that. They don't believe in Immaculate Conception or the Virgin Birth.
Certainly not.
Yeah. So, but in the Catholic tradition, that has been a teaching, and I think this question is coming out of that tradition. And
Okay.
yeah,
Got it. But to me, it's very important to establish that to be born sinless is not a blood lineage, as we say. I mean, it's not a literal blood genetic thing. It
Yeah.
cannot be traced through genetics, DNA, mitochondrial DNA.
right. It's a sin, and sin is separation from God. It's not a biological condition. It's not a biological.
But because we use the language lineage, it suggests that.
Yes, and I don't want to say that there's nothing to that, because the orientation of the mind and heart probably is, even through the cells, in some way communicated. Because the principle teaches us that the division between mind and body is not an absolute division. It's fundamental teaching, which we're going to talk about. Song Song and Kyung Song, they're two aspects of the same reality. So, to make a wide separation between the spirit and the body, or between spiritual lineage and physical lineage, itself is, it's not grounded in the principle, because the principle understands Song Song and Kyung Song to be two dimensions of the same reality.
But the concept does arise from the language use.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that that's partly justified because of our understanding of the relationship between Song Song and Kyung Song. That there are two aspects. So we don't see an absolute divide between the physical and the spiritual. Right? And because of that, to talk about physical lineage is not that far off, because if there is a change in the spiritual, there also should be some change in the physical.
But we know that's not true because of the study of DNA. It is not true. That they've documented, they can trace very clearly the progression of DNA through the mitochondrial line, exactly what happens, and how far apart people are at different times in history.
No, I've studied that. What the mitochondrial E theory says is that we can see that the lineage of humankind goes back to a common mother.
Yeah.
Right?
But it also says that the whole basis of tracing things through mitochondrial DNA is that there's a very predictable and orderly rate of mutation. And you can count the separation between, you can take one DNA sample and another DNA sample, you can compare them and see how many points separate they are. You can count back to when those two lineages actually had a real common ancestor.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about a common ancestor, and the whole mitochondrial Eve theory, which I find quite fascinating and supportive of the principle, is that all humankind came from a common mother, right? And that's through the process you just described. However, that's separate from, because we never did a DNA analysis of Jesus, nor have we done it of the Father, to answer your question. So it's, in a sense, irrelevant to the issue of the special lineage of Abraham. But all I'm saying is that if we understand the basic point of the principle, what the relationship is between the spirit and the material, we cannot make such clear-cut separation. And actually, to be honest with you, that's what quantum physics, if you study David Bohm, that's what David Bohm is talking about. When he's saying, actually, in this, the whole universe is comprised of two dimensions. One which he calls the explicate order, which is this physical universe. You could call it the visible substantial world, and the explicate order, and the implicate order. And the implicate order, according to Bohm, is the consciousness that's embedded in the cosmic stuff. And so, I find this very fascinating, because I believe this is exactly what the principle in its theological language is saying when it says that Song and Hyung-Song, whether it's in the human being or in the cosmic level, these two dimensions, the invisible dimension and the visible dimension, right, are two sides of the same reality. And it answers many questions of origin, including the question of origin of life. Because the idea that, I'm going far afield, but anyway, this is actually part of the principle. The idea that life could arise out of inert, inorganic matter is nonsense. And that's why science is making a breakthrough. But if you take Bohr's idea about there being these two orders that are interrelated, interpenetrating, and that one order is in consciousness, then we can understand. It's not a matter that consciousness came later. It's always been there. It's always been a part of reality. That's what the principle is saying. Song and Hyung-Song are always together. They're always those two dimensions, right? So in this sense, we can understand that a lot of the old thinking and teachings are inadequate. This is why both science and religion have been separated. But as we get into this age, and as science develops more, and as we explain the principle more, we will see these are two sides of the same reality. Right? But anyway, we can have more discussion on this later, but it's a very important point. Okay, so I just want to briefly say, this is the table of contents. We're going to give you these books with all of these slides in it tomorrow, and you can read this. So you can look at this on the board. We want to go a little more quickly, and this is just the content, so that's what we're covering now. You can read it on your own. And what is the principle of creation? Well, it's basically, it is God's blueprint for the creation of man and the universe. And according to the principle, in order to know our purpose of life or the universe, we have to know God. And anything, any existence, in order to know how to use it or how to fulfill its purpose, you have to know why it was created. If you never saw a watch or a clock before, and you found this piece of watch on the sands of a beach, and you picked it up, you would have no idea what it's meant to do, right? Unless you know the purpose for which it was designed. That's true of everything, including our life. So unless we know the purpose of our creation, why we were created, then we cannot understand how to be happy, how to fulfill our life. And of course, when is the purpose embodied in the thing? It's embodied when the thing is made. Right? That's when it's embedded. Likewise, man at the creation, his purpose was, if you will, invested in his being, or is his being. So people, if we say people who do well or live well are living in accord with the principles of creation, living in accord, in other words, with the very inherent laws that arise out of their very being, or that are embedded in their very being. So just as if you violate a physical law like gravity, as we said before, you will get hurt. So if you violate these principles, these spiritual principles, you're going to not be healthy spiritually, and maybe physically too. Now, this whole issue about God's existence, this is where it borrows from unification thought, incidentally, in case you wonder. The ODP has some extra thinking, but it's all based on Father's teaching, and in this case, it's from unification thought. From the beginning, ancient philosophy in the West began, as you know, in Greece. That culture, which was provided at the time to provide the culture for that of the kingdom that Jesus was meant to realize. And the various philosophers Greek philosophers were wrestling with this question: what is the fundamental stuff out of which everything in the universe came? What's the origin of all things? And at the beginning, they very simply reduced it to one thing. So in the case of Thales, it was water. Anaxagoras, the boundless. Anaximenes, the air. Heraclitus, the fire. Right? He said the fire is what is the basis of all reality. Pythagoras was a little more abstract, and he talked about numbers as being constitutive of reality. Not such a crazy idea, incidentally. If you remember what the principle says about God having a mathematical nature and why numbers are important providentially, right? It's because that aspect is within the Godhead. Parmenides talked about being, fundamental being. Here it is. Empedocles saw the four elements. And Aristotle talked about prima materia. Actually, Plato before him also talked about form, and Aristotle took both that and prima materia, the first matter. So that Greek philosophy seemed to be, they recognized the question that they were struggling with was the important thing. Where did this all come from? So they were looking for a source, a single source, because they realized, okay, it must have originated out of some one thing, right? And that as they looked around, they realized that all of this multiplicity, they felt had some underlying unity. And thus, they were looking for that underlying unity. And Eastern philosophy, so if you look at that, the Li Qi principle of energy theory, basically. Li Qi. So our energy, Qi, the Koreans say Ki, right? That Qi or Qi in Chinese was fundamental in that it is that Qi was yin and yang. And they also talked about 5 agents, which are listed here: metal, wood, water, fire, and soil. The issue about what's the origin of all reality is something which has been debated throughout the ages. And one could basically say there are 2 camps. The 2 camps, one who kind of reduce it to a fundamental material element, such as water or fire, and others that reduce it or that go back to an original spiritual source. It could be, form or idea, in the case of Plato, right? Or simply spirit. And ultimately, as religion developed, it was the transcendent God. The transcendent God. As I said, this this fundamental division between the materialist and the idealist, right? The spiritualist and the materialist, in the modern world gets expanded and concretized into 2 major spheres: communism and democracy, respectively. Communism, which denies spirit totally and says all things arise out of matter, and Christianity, which goes the other way and says fundamentally there is a spiritual source to all being. As I was saying, you see that it has become relevant. Today's science, physics, reveals that the ultimate causal element of matter is energy, and it goes on to say, and I think here, that quantum physics is about to discover the origin of energy. And what I was just talking about, David Bohm, he is someone, when quantum physics was first developed by Planck and others, Einstein didn't feel comfortable about it. Einstein was at Princeton, and Einstein just felt like there's something wrong about this theory. And David Bohm, who happened to be at Princeton with Einstein, actually also felt there was some inadequacies in the traditional quantum theory. And David Bohm, whom I just mentioned previously, is the one that came up with this view of there being these 2 dimensions to reality, 2 orders: implicate order, which is the consciousness, and the explicate order, the material world, and that they were interpenetrated. I think that, he really kind of broke through. And this is what I think the principle here is referring to when it talks about developments in quantum physics. Traditional quantum physics, not so much, but the development that we see with David Bohm is very, I think, relevant, very fruitful, if you will, for fully understanding reality. So, the question, ultimately, as Youngkin has said several times, hey, look at, before you teach the divine principle, even to your children, you better, you better see if they think God exists, and if not, you better talk about that. Because you're not going to get very far otherwise.
That's true.
So this is why he's been having so many debates and training our second gen to, and I think we have one here, right? Yes. To actually understand that reason is on the side of God. God's existence. The preponderance of reason would say it's better to believe in God than not. So this, but you know, part of the problem with the debate about the existence of God is that actually all of us don't believe in the God that some people believe in. Many people believe in. Yeah? We don't believe in the God. I mean, I've talked to a lot of second year, about God, and I really understand that those who have resistance to praying or to affirming that God exists even, that's because they are taking a traditional view of God that they heard in society. It's actually not Father's view of God. And that's why many of us, before the church, were agnostics at least. So we have to understand that not only God's existence, but that we're affirming, but what is the nature of that God? Okay? And that's where the principle helps us. Also, the principle. So before we can even talk about what do you mean by God? All right? Okay? Yeah. But what is the qualities of God? What's the characteristics, the basic, if you will, the nature of God? That question we need to understand. Because if God is all-sufficient unto itself, doesn't need anything, right? Then why do I pray to God? And why does Abinah have to sacrifice so much for God? And we, Abinah saying he wants to heal the suffering of God. It's a very different understanding of God from a God who doesn't have any feeling, right? And doesn't need anything and anyone, right? So, in addition to the question, does God exist, we have to ask, what is this God? What is the nature of this God, right? And of course, the principle agrees sort of with natural theology that we can know something about the nature of God through understanding the creation. So this is what I'm saying. A lot of the views of God that are out there, traditionally, they don't really explain the God we're speaking about, the God we're praying to, the God we feel we are to become one with. So the God, it's either the God of love or the God of judgment, because we have both of that in traditional religion. According to Genesis, God created man in his image. Okay. So then what is in the image that reflects back to God? What is that image? And Plotinus, who's actually a Hellenistic philosopher, from the tradition of Plato, but he lived several hundred years after Plato, he developed this emanationist theory. Basically, he said, we really can't get at the purpose of the motivation of the creation. And that's a very popular view of God. Even today, there are adaptations of this. They probably don't even know it came from Plotinus. But a lot of people who believe in God have a Plotinian view of God and of the creation. In the unification principle, we have a pretty clear understanding of God as the God of Shimjong, the God of heart and true love, true beauty and goodness, also a unique being. And we do affirm the traditional attributes of the major religions: unchanging, eternal, omnipresent, absolute, right? We do affirm that. In addition, God's motivation and purpose for creating, we know, is to have an object with whom God could have the give and take of love. So, God wanted to love someone, and He needed another. And He created us to be His love object. In that sense, you could say God needed love, a love object, in order to experience love. that need arose out of his very nature. So it's not a weakness. Some people go, well, God has a need, then he has a weakness. No. That's his basic nature, is to love. So, in order to actualize that love at higher and higher levels, he created progressively the existences, the beings, who could have higher and deeper and more progressively complete relationship with him. So that's why God created us all individually to be unique, so he can have innumerable objects of love, because God is so great. God's love is so great that he wants to love each of us, and he wants to love all billions and billions eternally, trillions of us, right? Forever. God is infinite, and his love is infinite. His desire is infinite. So, 12 children, 13 children. I think I'm going to say God has. That's not enough, God wants trillions of children. And true parents, as one with God, then that's why all humankind, right, are their children. And that's why their love is so great, because it's the love of God, and it's fully capable of embracing all of us. Of course, when the true parents ultimately ascend, right? Everyone in the past and also the future, and all those living, will be able to have a direct relationship with them. Just as Christians, throughout the centuries, have had a relationship with Christ, with Jesus Christ. That's why this is all nonsense when people talk about they're taking the place of the position of true parents. It's nonsense. It's a total misunderstanding of who they are. Coaches. So, all right. Shall we end here, and we'll have lunch. And then we'll pick it up here at the dual characteristics of God and the creative. Is that good?
Ang bilis ng oras.
All right. Would you like to pray?
Ito